And primarily we want to continue to look at some of the high-risk situations. At some point in any minister's life, there will be a time when he is confronted with a volatile, high-risk situation where a person's life may be on the line. It is important that he be prepared, and here are a few suggestions. And note here, I suggest that you not only read up on this section in terms of the personal safety here in terms of Stone, but you visit a crisis phone center in your local area to get an idea of what a high-risk situation is like and how it is handled. And it will just give you some on-the-scene information about some of these high-risk situations. I must dare say that I've been in many of these situations just by the mere fact of being a minister, and the mere fact of some high-risk situations I was in where I had no choice because I was a residential therapist at that time, working with the persons. Of course, in the military, I had high-risk situations, but that was a part of my job as such in terms of doing that. A states, establishing a relationship with a high-risk person takes special experience and finesse. Not only do you have to be able to develop a relationship with a wide range of diverse people, you need to be able to do it quickly, and that is a very important part here, and I'm certain that Stone will talk a little bit more about that. But from my own experience, you really need to be aware, try to be aware as much as you can of your approach and your body language in terms of really approaching a person in a high-risk situation. And one of the things that in a person, you can tell sometimes just how the person looks at you, whether the person might be feeling okay or not okay. There are some persons who can make it very clear, whether you're a minister or not, that they don't want you near them, you know. And that's just all to it. And when they tell you that, you don't go, okay? You get out of there. And there are some persons who might just be uncertain about you, but something clicks in their head. Now, if you are that person's pastor, many times you have more of an opportunity in terms of that person really, responding to you in an okay manner than if the person doesn't know you at all. Or if you are a pastor, you don't know that person at all, they don't know you at all. You might know you're a minister, but they still, you still have to really be aware in terms of how that person responds to you. You yourself should have a pretty good idea of the sort of persons that you feel that you might be able to really deal a little bit more effectively with. There are some persons in some high-risk situations that, hey, you might say, well, I don't deal too well with someone who's drunk and intoxicated and pretty violent here. You know. Some person might say, I don't deal too well with somebody who's just beating up their wives and the wife and they're in an agitated state as such. I don't deal too well with somebody who's threatening to jump off the bridge here, you know. And so you many times need to assess whether it's something that you can yourself are able to really deal with. Have you dealt with some of these situations before, something similar before? And it's a quick process, really, you know, in terms of just going through your mind, in terms of assessing what's going on here. He said, mention in B, listen as carefully as you can to any clues the individual might give you. And that's important. That person many times can give you some clues in terms of whether you should try to deal with them, approach them, or whatever it might be. And that's what you want to pay attention to, those clues that person might give to you, warnings as such. Clues that they might give to you, they might tell you that they feel that you're okay. And there was one situation when I was attending this college up north, private college, and it just so happened that this young lady being at this high-powered private college, there was a lot of pressure. And her father, of course, was a minister, and of course, father sent her to that college for her to get that, education at the private college and stuff. But there was a lot of stuff going on at that campus that was really challenging or really creating some distress for her in terms of her own belief system, in terms of belief in God and the way she was brought up. So I was aware of that myself. Now I was at more of a mature level because I'd already graduated from, done my undergraduate work, had my master's degree, so it was just post-baccalaureate work that I was doing, But she was just, I think, a junior, maybe a sophomore, I'm not too certain, but a very intelligent lady. And it just so happened that one day, and she would mention to me some of the stressors that she was having and as such and what was going on. And she was particularly having a hard time with a powerful professor at that college, private college, that was really browbeating her quite a bit. And so, of course, I didn't think that much. Of course, my heart went out to her, but I didn't expect what happened. It just so happened that one day she just flipped out, and was, and I don't know, persons were called me to the dorm, and she was on the stairs, and I saw these people trying to reason and talk with her and so forth and so on. And she was telling them, "You stay away from me. So just don't come near." And then she was so in such a state she was in a state of almost a psychotic break there, but she was at least so aware of her rights, in terms of her rights, that if any of them had tried to, they would have been in for a big lawsuit also. But she really didn't want anybody, no other persons to really approach her. Don't even touch me, what it might be. Don't come near. And then somebody asked her, "Well, who do you trust? Who would you trust?" And she looked at me and said, "Him." And I said, "Oh, for goodness sake, this is interesting, Lord." And I said, "Well, how can I be of help to you?" And she just was talking. I was listening. I was paying attention very carefully. But I was aware of the fact, just from my training in psychology, it was my major anyway, but I was just beginning to get the experience as such. I've talked with a lot of people, but it might be, but this was one of the new situations for me to see such a person in such a high deal here where they might even attack, So I was, and then the people knew, and I had a sense too that she was going to need some type of special care. And so I just was there walking alongside her, just near her, and saying, "Hey, whatever you might need, just let me know." And of course, the persons were saying, "Well, we're going to have to take her to one of these, there was a facility where she was going to have to be committed, and because it was obvious that she had was in and out of contact with reality, and then of course she definitely was not going to voluntarily do it, and the only way that but she did get the level that she would do it if I were to go with her, I said, "Well, I'm not in the business of getting into this, being committed myself, I didn't say that, but I said, "Well, I'll go with you," and so forth and so on, and so she went to this place, mental health facility, and she signed herself in, and I didn't know how devastating that was. I mean, I found myself almost going through a crisis. I didn't know that much about crisis situation at that time. That was one of the most that was a horrible feeling I had, you know. Here's this young lady here, you know, very intelligent, so forth and so on, and having to commit herself, you know, to an institution as such, and which she did. And it just so happened that I evidently in the process, what I was doing was looking carefully, listening carefully to it. I was looking for whatever clues, what it might be, and I was hoping that I didn't talk that much, you know, because I didn't know all the right words to use. So sometimes, if you don't know how the right words to use, what it might be, you're not too good at it. Is be quiet, and do the word of God. So be still and know that I'm God. You know. So that's what I did. So, but it just so happened that the end result is that after being there for a few weeks, what it might be, and the medication and stuff, she finally came back and joined us again. Of course, I visited her. I haven't talked with her in terms of her coming back and joining us and stuff. And the fortunate thing that was happening is that her dad took away from that situation, and that was very important to do. That was one of my first encounters in terms of the whole sort of thing here. And of course, learn how to diffuse volatile situations. And that takes some experience there as such, because in all honesty, where I really learned how to do that was when I worked as a residential therapist at a residential place here when we're dealing with persons from ages 11 to 18. I found that compared to my psychiatric work with adults, with male and female there, I didn't have any sort of experiences where the persons were violent as such. But when working with the young persons, I found that they could get very violent. Not only can they be self-destructive, but they can be other destructive. And so therefore, there's a certain kind of training that we had to have in the process of working with these young persons, so that we can make certain that they did not hurt themselves nor hurt us. And so therefore, we learned that when a situation is very volatile, and especially when they're escalated in an escalated state, and that means that they're really up there agitated and so forth and so on, and ranting and raving and threatening and whatever. That is not the time to get into that. That's the time when you don't put hands on. That's the time that you just let that person rant and rave as such. And that's the time, if you're going to say anything, you use the broken record, and that's to say the same thing over and over again, over and over again, over and over again. But don't even try to do a complicated talk, because you might even make the situation worse. And that situation came in handy when one of the members of a church that I was associate minister at that time called me, and I mentioned earlier in terms of her daughter had been found murdered near a golf course, and that her son, at that time when I went over to the house, was in a state of escalation, very angry, and he'd been drinking and everything else, and he wanted to go and do something to whoever killed his sister, and he was agitated and walking back and forth, a big, strong-looking guy, and it didn't mean anything to him that I was a minister. Despite the fact that his mother said, don't you know you're the minister? It didn't mean anything to him. The man was in a very high, agitated deal here where he can go off at any time, And I just stood to the side, with a very non-threatening body language, and just allowed him to go, and what it might be, you don't get in people's way, you don't go there talking about no, you're going to get yourself hurt, okay? And so therefore, I just waited until he, and then the thing that I would say over and over again really was that God loves you, and God loves you, God loves you, and I just said it over and over again, in a very soft way, and eventually he started coming down, and he started coming down. It still wasn't the time, and then he had come pretty down, and then he just walked outside and sat on the steps, sat down. When he did that, then that was a time when I went and sat by him, and that was a time when he was open to what I had to say. And so therefore, be very careful in terms of, or else when you find a person is very volatile. I know a lot of the person that was very ready to really bite your head off, or a lot of persons attacked a lot of the residential therapists while I was working, and I didn't myself get attacked, but I had to help restrain a lot of persons, who attacked others, because I had better sense in terms of getting someone escalated. You have to know how to talk many times to people, especially young people who have certain sort of emotional disorders as such, even adults as such. So I knew how to show due respect to listen what it might be and do that, where there were some people who were abrupt, pushy, what it might be, and with that kind of approach, they even further created an escalation for the individual. There was one incident where this girl, she was about 17, had some real serious problems, and one of the therapists went in there and just said some snappy words to her as such, and just kept on what it might be. And I was trying to tell this therapist, I said, please, and walk away. But she had stayed there bothering this girl so much, so the girl got in a state of escalation. And when that happened, that's about it. And this girl was known to attack folks. And so, sure enough, this therapist is going to walk away, turn her back to the girl walking away, and as she did that, that girl was coming after her. And I had to intervene, and I got it right in the back. I got it right in my shoulder blades, and just protect this girl, because I felt that she'd hit that therapist, she probably would have been seriously injured, and I just took the blow. And of course, then there was no other option other than, at that time, to utilize the parts trainings in terms of subduing her, But there are ways, and I think people ought to talk about that sometime, is how can you diffuse a situation that is really volatile, especially a persons who are really going at it, What are some of the ways that you can do that, And persons who are in a volatile, you mentioned about the number E, think about how people in volatile situations would view any people you might send to help them, and that's true too. You have to really think about, if you know something about that person, if you don't know anything about that person, just give them some of the clues from that individual. You can probably get a feel in terms of who that you might be able to send out there in terms of dealing with certain situations. There are situations where the bottom line is that the only thing that's going to work here is when you have to have the police come in. That is the only thing that's going to work, and that's just the bottom line. But you have to, again, show pretty good judgment in terms of that. Now, their police officers differ in terms of their personalities. There are some police officers that are very good in terms of coming in and knowing how to really get a person settled down and really know what to do in terms of getting them okay. And there are other ones who don't waste any time. They come in and boom, up against the wall, and might be handcuffed, boom, down, here we go. And so and I saw and there's some mental health professionals who might come in when there's someone who is experiencing a mental disorder, very agitated, and I was very impressed with the mental health professional that I had to call in with a young lady that was very agitated, to the extent that she could be violent. She had been violent before, and I was able to really talk with her and just kind of do an assessment in terms of what was going on with her, because she was on the verge of she was some psychosis. She was losing contact with reality. And it just so happened that I said, we got to get a mental health professional in here. And it just so happened that they sent the right guy. And when I saw him, really, he didn't look like a mental health professional. He had a weird look about him, but he was familiar with people who had a craziness, And this girl, when she saw him, she really sensed something, and she was trying her best to pull it together. She really was. and he would ask her a certain question a certain way, that she would try to not seem to be crazy, what it might be, but she couldn't, it didn't work for her, you know. And he just had a knack, he had a way, what it might be, and before what it might be, they had an ambulance coming here ready to take her to a place, you know, and she didn't fight anything else. She willingly went, and I was just kind of amazed in terms of how he did it. If it had been anybody else, the girl probably would have attacked him. You know, we would tore up the whole room and stuff. You know, but they just by chance sent in the right person and knew how to do it. You know, so therefore sometimes, there are some people even in your church might have certain kinds of abilities, what it might be, that you might think sometimes it might be helpful in when a situation get pretty volatile. And even within your church family, you know. There was a man that came into our church Sunday, and he had been there before. And he was just looked like he was in a daze. And people were trying to talk with him what it might be. He was just in a daze, just walking in a daze, what it might be. And he had lost one of his sandals someplace, you know. And he was just looking and stuff, and one guy, young man, and he just gave him some very direct instructions, and it was very nice. It wasn't just firm, direct instructions, and he followed the young man's instructions, and he sat down on the pew. Somebody found his other sandal and brought it to him, and he sat there. As a matter of fact, that morning I was preaching. that morning I was preaching that morning. I thought, oh, for goodness sakes, you know, God has sent another soul here that's in need. And he sat through it. He sat through the situation, the whole thing, you know. But with that kind of way he was presenting and stuff, at any time, that man could have become violent. At any time, he could have, because I've seen that before. I've seen that kind of move, what it might be. But I knew that I was not the one that he was going to respond to. I knew that the pastor was not the one he was going to respond to. But there was a young man in his 20s, you know, late 20s, that he responded to, you know. And this young man so it's just really kind of interesting sometimes in terms of who you might send to help persons. And he said, F, combine quick action with careful thought. It is important to act quickly in a volatile crisis situation, but do take time to make sure you are acting wisely and that you are acting and responding to the crisis correctly. And yes, you better take your time and look in terms of what's going on here, you know. And sometimes you might not be the person to act, you know. Just because you might be the minister of the pastor, it might not be for you to act, you know, in terms of dealing with this situation that might have already become very, what it might be. There are some situations where I really don't get involved a lot in domestic violence, violent situation. I don't, because they're not situations that I feel that I can handle too well. And a lot of police officers have found out that they don't handle those too well either. And many officers in the past had gotten injured or seriously injured or killed, getting involved in a husband-wife squabble as such. But I know that from some of the conversations I've had with persons and so forth and so on, and if there were a situation where this individual and wife got into an argument, a really violent sort of situation where there might have been some physical things going on there also, I would not advise a certain pastor to try to intervene. I mean, he's their pastor, but I would not advise that pastor to intervene. I would have to strongly warn him, no, you're not the one to do it. And of course, I know why, but he's not the one to do it. Okay, and so pastors have to be very much aware of your congregation and your members, and even their attitudes towards you. And if you are not, then you better be very cautious in terms of some of the things you might feel that you need to do just because you're the pastor. You might end up getting yourself hurt. And of course, you need to watching for your own safety. No matter how urgent or serious a crisis is, it is essential that you first make certain that you will be safe. Make sure to take whatever safety precautions are necessary. Here are a few suggestions. A, it is best to arrange for a neutral site or an office visit for someone that you feel may be volatile. Do not, I say, go out there into a situation that might be pretty volatile, a person that might be very volatile or dangerous. Do not go out there by yourself into the situation. If a person is suicidal, it is best to talk it through with them and arrange for a family member or friend to stay with them through the night rather than making a personal visit. A pastor in our area was stabbed 17 times after arranging to go to a suicidal man's home. He lived, but he was very fortunate. It was discovered in a later investigation while the pastor had calmed the man down during the time it took for him to leave his office and to come to the man's home, the man had become agitated again. And so that's the thing that can happen sometimes. Even if you might calm a person down, on the telephone, that's suicidal. But the thing about it, by the time you might get back there, the person might be in agitated. There at the house, they might be in agitated state again. And so therefore, you have to really be very careful about that. Do not go to high-risk situations alone, especially at night. That is very important. Get someone to go with you and meet in a public place if possible. There are times that a public place might not be the most appropriate. For example, show of emotions. But it is better to err on the side of caution. For example, one of the guys that I know often take a police officer with him, and at the very least have an elder go along. And there are situations where he's a chaplain, I know. He will definitely take a police officer with him going out into some of the situations that are very dangerous. You can take an elder, but be aware, don't make the mistake that the pastor made when he took one of his associate ministers out, not really being aware of the situation where he and that associate minister ended up being stabbed. And so therefore, be very careful about that. Have your resources lined before you go. I suggest 1 or 2 people you have on call would be willing to go with you at a moment's notice. Make sure they are aware of what you're getting into. They're trained and knowledgeable as well. And this is where the training comes in, really, in terms of lay persons being trained and dealing with certain sort of crisis situation. It's going to take some time on that pastor's part. The pastor can have someone who can do it. But it's certainly something that's going to come in handy, because sooner or later some volatile situations are going to come about. They will come about. And so therefore, if you have some persons who are pretty much that's trained in the area, you can have them on notice, and definitely want to let them be informed about what's going on. But it's always good to have somebody, some backup here. When you approach a house parked several houses away, you will want to make a slow, cautious approach to the house or apartment, and that is so important. I'm always, even persons I know, when I go to their homes to do some counseling, even if it's not a volatile situation, what it might be, I still have a tendency to ring the doorbell or knock and stand to the side. If they ask who is it, I'll let them know. But other than that, I really am very uncomfortable standing directly in front of the door. I really am. And so, definitely when you have a situation where you know that the person is very agitated or suicidal or homicidal in that house, you definitely don't want to go there and, first of all, park directly in front of the place, because the person might come out there shooting as such. You want to park down. You want to be very careful to even approach in the house or the apartment as such. There are some houses or some apartments are arranged in certain ways that it might be very difficult to do that. So therefore, you're going to have to start being creative in terms of what you might need to do in terms of dealing with the situation. When entering a room, move slowly. Access the situation and look around. If the room is dark, proceed with caution and ask for more light. Put yourself in a position where no one can approach you from behind. and that's very important. The next one statement said, do your best to determine where conversation will take place. Suggested to them when you enter their home, kitchens are not advisable as they contain many makeshift weapons. Bedrooms are also not suggested as they are the most common places that firearms and weapons are stored. Also, gain and maintain control of the situation at all times. This is certainly a time when showing and maintaining authority is permissible. And if it's necessary, you can have persons who feel more comfortable in terms of sitting in the living room here, and we need to sit down here, and we can go from there. Some direction. You're not going to be one of these abrasive, authoritative sort of person. It's just a firm sort of deal in terms of leading people to a situation that you feel would be a lot better in terms of maybe some things being looked at here. If a situation gets out of control, escaping the best possible scenario, leaving immediately and getting help is far better than staying and trying to resolve the situation. If you know that the situation here, no matter what you're trying to do or what you're trying to say, or it might be, and this person is getting more and more agitated, what it might be, the wise thing is to just politely bow out. That's the wise thing to do, is just politely bow out, and that's just all to it. So you won't find yourself, your own life being endangered. And so therefore, and there are other situations I've kind of hit on a little bit. And of course, the domestic violence situation, police and fire scene, grief and loss, marital counseling issues, and even there are just situations where things just happen in terms of just come up and mention about, even at my own church at one time, the guy came from off the street and was asking for some money, and the pastor would not respond in a positive way to him, and so therefore he escalated very quickly. And when I arrived, I saw the deacons around the pastor, and the pastor really looking agitated at this guy, and this guy, this big muscular guy hovering over my pastor there, and I really was very nervous about this. It was kind of a shock in a way, not seeing this guy and what it might be, but it was kind of a shock seeing my pastor being confronted in this way by this person, a man of God, a man that I had a lot of reverence for, still do, and here this guy calling him all sorts of names, very, very, very unkind names, and the thing that was kind of surprising is that my pastor was showing the agitation, with him and stuff, and the more that was happening, the more this guy was getting worse, and so, but I finally recognized, I mentioned before that I'd seen this guy before, he and his wife, his wife, they were in need of food, and he wanted some help in terms of getting food and stuff. And I'm one of the persons that if you say you need something, especially you're hungry, it might be, I will give you my last $1. I'm not going to be concerned about what you're going to do with it. If you say you're hungry and your wife needs some food, if I can't, go and take it and get to the food for you, I'm going to give you something to get some food. And I remembered that I had done that with him many weeks ago. And so I was able to, in some form or fashion, to get his attention. And he looked at me, and I guess there was some recognition there, and he came over to me. And I asked him, I said, hey, how can I help you? He started complaining about the pastor and this and that. And I said, well, he's a man of God, but I'm concerned about what your needs are, okay? And so I just started talking with him. As he was talking with me, I kind of walked him out of the church and walked outside with him. And that de-escalated and so forth and so on. And I got help for them in terms of what they needed, you know. But these are kind of the unexpected sort of situations that really come about as such. Now, Stone goes on to present what we call portraits in crisis in terms of chapter 5. Now, we're not going to go through those situations as such. Those are situations that you, on your own, can take a look at and kind of go through. But next time we meet, we're going to look at chapter 6, the church as a community. But if we looking at our time, I do want to speak about some of the things here. An article here that is written by Gary Goberson, and it's from a book called Mastering Pastoral Counseling by Goberson and Hart and Archibald. That book is basically no longer in print. It's a very good little book that I really feel is very good for ministers and pastors. And I just so hope that some way, somehow, that little book can be revised, or what it might be, another revised edition where that can be made available to ministers and pastors, persons in the ministry. But this article that's taken from this book is called Crisis Situations. And of course, you can read along with me. He said, all pastors, this is a very important statement here he's mentioned. He said, all pastors live squarely on a fault line. The question is not if a crisis will come, but when. Even though I can't schedule them, I can, like residents of San Francisco, learn to be prepared. And that's an interesting statement to just reflect upon. And he speaks here about that they are candidated at Glen Ellyn Bible Church. Following the Sunday morning service, we were having lunch at the home of the chairman of the Board of Elders. Suddenly, in the middle of the meal, the phone rang, and when our host returned, his face was pale. He quickly gave us the facts. The son of one of the church families, a college-age man who had attended church that morning, had left the service early, gone home, and apparently taken his own life. We dropped our forks and drove together to the grieving family's home. As others gave comfort to the family, I listened and avoided treading on their grief. As the afternoon went on, my thoughts turned to the evening service. What I had planned to preach would now be out of place. This was a crisis not only for the immediate family, but for the whole church. After we left our home, I spent the next hour planning to lead that service. I chose a different sermon text, 2 Corinthians 1st, and outline a new message. Although prepared at short notice, my ministry that night by necessity addressed the pain and grief everyone was feeling. It was not a typical candidating Sunday, but years later one of the church elders observed, when we came to vote on Gary's candidacy the next week, it wasn't a matter of deciding whether or not to call him as our pastor. He already was. We'd been through a crisis together, and he had already proven to be our pastor. The main point is this: crises don't come at convenient times. I certainly can't schedule them in my calendar, but they are a critical part of my calling. As much as preaching and administration, not only do people need care for the devastation already experienced, they need help handling the lingering effects. Crises have the potential to worsen and expand like the fires and aftershocks that follow a major earthquake. All pastors live squarely on a fault line. The question is not if a crisis will come, but when. Even though I can't schedule them, I can, like residents of San Francisco, learn to be prepared. Separate crisis from problems. First, we must know what truly is a crisis. If we treat every problem as a crisis, we will be full-time crisis managers. Every pastor has had calls in the middle of the night from people who want immediate attention for relatively minor problems. The key is to be fully available to such people who are not over-responding. If the person calling considers his situation a crisis, then I treat it as one, at least initially. I give such person my full and immediate attention. I respect the feelings and validate the pain they feel. I show I care, and I'm available like this until I can see where things stand. Empathy at this point is critical. I try to react not based on how I feel about others' problems, but on how I would feel if I were in their place. Their mountains may be a molehill, but if they see it as a mountain, I need to help them work through those feelings and get a better perspective. Communicating such care while assessing the situation may take only 5 minutes. Then, depending on the need, I can set an appointment or make other plans to attend to them. In this way, I can manage the problem without dismissing the person's pain. And if it's an authentic crisis, I can make immediate action. So manage your own reaction. I once received a call at 3 a.m. to come and help the family of a man who had just killed himself with a shotgun. Initially, all they knew was that a shot had been fired and the man was hospitalized. It was my job to drive the wife and her 3 children to the hospital, and then, when I discovered exactly what happened, informed them that the husband, father, had taken his own life. In situations like this, my first challenge is to manage my own reactions. I typically face 2 kinds of crises. Those I feel confident and qualified to manage because of my experience and training, and those that intimidate me. Each has its own temptations. When I feel comfortable, I get impatient. I know the nature of the problem before the person stops talking. I know what needs to happen. I know how people tend to respond, and I know how to fix things. I want to start giving advice prematurely. When I'm intimidated by the situation, I want to do something, anything, because I'm the pastor. I feel like if I don't take control, I'll appear feckless or frail or weak in a sense. Under that pressure, I usually blunder. To manage my reaction, I keep 2 things in mind. I won't be much good to people if their crisis become my crisis. In a situation where I can neither touch bottom or keep my head above water, I have to remain calm. If I identify too much with people's fear, panic, and insecurity, I will be unable to minister. I want to be able to feel what they feel, to tell them those feelings are normal, but I want to keep a clear head. How? My answer is to acquire skills and training. I must have something to offer people. Burn out his pastors and counselors who repeatedly face situations that outstrip their competence. When I was in seminary, I also worked as a real estate agent. One day my partner put me in an uneasy situation. A woman who had worked as a waitress with his daughter was dying of cancer. The doctors had told her she had only a few weeks to live. She didn't know Christ. He said, you have seminary training. Would you call on her? Yes, I'll gladly see her, I replied. Inside, however, I felt queasy, dubious of my ability to say anything that would help her. Later, I sat in the parking lot of the hospital, marshaling my strength, thinking nothing I have done to this point has prepared me for this. I prayed and decided the one thing I could do was listen. If nothing else, I could give an attentive ear and pray with her. With that in mind, I walked into the hospital and took the elevator to her room. It didn't take much small talk to get down to her real need. I said, I don't know what you're going through, and I really want to hear. It started as ovarian cancer, she said. Then it spread throughout my lower tract. The pain is like the harshest pain a woman goes through in labor. But this one never stops. At first, I fought against taking pain medication because I wanted to be clear-minded when I visited with my 13-year-old daughter. But then the pain got too much. By the time we finished talking several hours later, she had prayed to receive Christ. When I walked out of the hospital, I was totally spent. I got in my car and slumped in the seat with my eyes closed. I knew the Lord had helped me minister to this woman, but I also knew I lacked the competence to handle all the issues involved in helping people in crisis. Then and there I decided to learn all the crisis skills I could. Though I have followed through, I don't always have total control of my emotions, and at times I feel uneasy and at a loss. That's good. It keeps me depending on the Holy Spirit for effectiveness. I never in a crisis with the idea I'm going to solve it. I use the skills I've learned, yet only as the Holy Spirit applies them to the person in need can they take hold. A crisis is an opportunity. In a sense, I've learned to look forward to crisis, not to the harm they cause, but to the good that God brings as a result. Number 1, people grow. One night, a member, Sarah, called to tell me her 39-year-old husband was dead. While they were on vacation together, he had suffered a massive heart attack. She had no one to help her. My wife and I stepped in, and over the next few days became extremely close with her. Up until then, she had been only marginally involved in the church. As she experienced Christ's love through us in the church, she began wanting to share it with others. Now, Sarah has become heavily involved, caring for others in need. Her crisis was a tragedy, but she emerged a stronger person and a more committed believer. Number 2, relationship deepened. Most people never forget that the pastor was there in our deepest need. Our family is now as close to Sarah as to anyone in the church. Although before her crisis, I knew her only as a red-headed woman who sat in worship in the third row. After pastors leave a congregation, the people who keep contact with them are often those whom they helped in crisis. Number 3, a sense of satisfaction fills me. Since Christ is a part of my calling, and since I have invested considerably in crisis training, I get fireman-like satisfaction from entering the burning houses of people's lives and walking out with him on my shoulder. This isn't the Messiah complex at work, but a legitimate sense that I am doing something significant, doing what God called me to do. I can't immediately see the fruits of other pastoral labor, but when counseling in crisis are often taught, I see tangible results very quickly. Handling a crisis, I may not be able to plan for a specific crisis, but I can decide ahead of time what steps I would take once a crisis presents itself. Here's what I try to do. 1, offer presence. In the midst of the suicide tragedy on Canada Sunday, one woman from the congregation came to the family house and just sat on the couch with her arm around the shoulder of the grieving mother. For the entire afternoon, I don't think she said 10 words, but the mother later told me I drew more comfort from her than from anything. Presence is powerful. Pain and trauma isolate a person, particularly in medical crisis. A patient is in alien surroundings, treated by some personnel more like a problem than a person. People in pain want to withdraw, like a turtle into a shell, but isolation intensifies the pain. So those in crisis first need others to be with them. Meaningful touch, as the woman above showed, help pull crisis victim out of isolation. Sufferers can dismiss our words, but touch, the language of crisis, has innate authority. Listen attentively. One of the biggest mistakes a pastor can make is to prescribe answers and solutions in the initial stages of a crisis. At this stage, crisis victims need description, not prescription. So I let them fully describe what has happened, what they're feeling, what they're going through. Few things communicate compassion and concern more than unheard listening. This means resisting the temptation to offer even good advice. We all know that cliches usually cause more pain than comfort. When crisis victims hear pat answers, they feel we don't understand the depth of their traumas. But even truth given prematurely can do more harm than good. Although this may be the 50th person we've counseled about grief, to the person going through the grief, it feels like a unique experience. So telling a widow, you are not the only one who has experienced this. Others in our church have gotten through this, and so will you, only belittles her loss. Later, the person may want to get in touch with others who have gone through the same thing, but in the beginning, the person needs to simply express how this experience is like nothing else. Sometimes I don't listen well because I prejudge the situation of the person. I did this once with a couple in a marital crisis. They were not a part of the church, so I didn't know anything about them when they came to see me. But the wife, a seething volcano of anger and bitterness, made it difficult to like her from the start. She even made fun of the church, calling our worship a dog and pony show. I felt she was a lost cause, and frankly, I wanted to get rid of them gracefully. As counseling continued, however, I discovered some of the roots of her anger. She had suffered sexual abuse as a child. The more I learned, the less I wanted to write her off. Rarely are counseling situations clear from the first session. The longer I counsel, the more I know about human nature, and ironically, the less I feel I can prejudge people. More than ever, I listen for the factors that make this person and problem unique. Clarify the situation. Medical crises require quick decisions about procedures to be done, organs to be donated, life support system to be used. A death forces kin into dozens of decisions about funeral arrangements, the distribution of possessions, living arrangements, financial planning, and legal matters. Unemployment requires a person to reassess retirement, education, self-identity, and where to live. Crisis victims have to make many major life-changing decisions, and usually in a compressed period of time. One such decision alone is stressful. Add many together and it's bewildering. Tack on emotional shock and it's crushing. Not surprisingly, decision-making can cause people in crisis to freeze. They desperately need someone who can objectively identify the issues, sort out the priorities, and clarify values. When a person in the church loses a loved one, I drop everything and go to the family. I also accompany the family at the funeral home and inform them, I want to help you understand what the funeral director is doing. We go into the casket room and I help them clarify what it means to buy a casket, that their feelings for their loved ones don't have to be expressed in a lavish casket. I help them assemble documents. I've learned a key principle about how assertive I can be in helping a family deal with doctors, funeral directors, and lawyers. If these professionals are not making sense to me, they are almost certainly not making sense to the crisis victim, who is normally too intimidated to ask many questions. So I ask on his or her behalf. And because I've gone through these things before, I can help interpret the technical language and procedures and decisions. These aren't the only things I clarify. People need help interpreting their feelings. Is anger the fountainhead of this man's marriage problems, or is anger masking guilt over some failing? Is a broken woman at a funeral simply grieving her loss or resenting her increased responsibilities? The job of clarification and interpretation is one of our most important. Do damage control. Crisis can easily get out of control. Most people can deal with only one crisis at a time, but every crisis has the ability to spawn other emotional, financial, occupational, family, and identity crises. Victims can quickly lose hope. When a person is vulnerable, when everything is already shaky, crises offspring can do incredible damage. Take marital arguments. One couple came to me right after the wife learned of her husband's adulterous relationship. He had been involved for 3 years with his secretary. I knew I wasn't going to save their marriage in one session, but I did need to contain the forest fire. First, I wanted to keep them from tearing each other apart. In addition, they had 3 kids. I knew she probably wanted to march home and say, look what your father has done. She probably wanted to call up the other woman whom she knew well and tell her off. She could have kindled an inferno. She could have moved out of the house and cut herself off from everyone. Each of these could have created an additional crisis, and that was the last thing they needed right then. So in that first visit, we addressed the bare minimum. I needed to hear their story, trace how the adultery developed, and then let her initial anger and his defensiveness blaze in a place where they couldn't incinerate each other. She needed to hear me say, it's right for you to be angry at him. He needed to hear what you've done has not irreparably harmed your marriage or your life. There is still hope for you. And we tried to contain the flames to the smallest possible area. 2 years later, they're holding their own. They're still clearing away some of the charred timber, but they're making it. Show the next step. A woman called me and sobbing said, I have to see you today. I agreed to see her immediately. When she came in, I learned she was suffering intolerable guilt over 2 abortions received before committing her life to Christ. In a single day, due to a conversation she's had with a friend who didn't know her situation, it became a crippling issue. In that first meeting, I assured her of Christ's forgiveness and began to walk her through the grieving process. As we finished that session, I assured her, let's talk again next week. Her emotions were so tender, I knew she would require consistent support to keep her from tumbling back into debilitating guilt. People in crisis tremble before a dark future. They need light shed on the next step. They need to look forward to care and attention in the immediate future. So I always conclude my initial care with, I'll call you tonight, or we'll meet at my office on Tuesdays at 3 o'clock. I specify what I'm going to do next, and I don't put that too far in the future. How far depends on how they have responded to my initial attention. I don't overwhelm them with a detailed plan for solving the crisis. I tell them we're going to take this one step at a time. Most can't see much beyond the next step anyway. Recognize the uniqueness of various crises. As much as all crises require some approach, and all crises are alike. Each type of crisis requires unique skills, attention, and focus. Death. In addition to listening and empathy, I find people are helped by knowing the stages of grief. That way their mercurial emotions aren't so baffling to them. Domestic violence. Over the years, many abusive wives have called me saying they've been beaten and they're afraid it could happen again. We don't waste time scheduling an appointment for this afternoon at 3. Instead, I tell her to call the police and get to a shelter where I will make contact with her. I give immediate and specific direction with domestic violence because the victim has a confused, skewed understanding of her situation. Women often feel responsible. In addition, after being hit, they assume, well, this was an isolated thing. It won't happen again. Things will get better, but things usually get worse. Child abuse. The law requires I report any abuse I have witnessed or heard about. But when it comes to relaying second-hand information, I only report what I have witnessed or heard. A woman reported to me today that her child is regularly beaten by the woman's husband. Not, I know a child who is being beaten by his father. It's the legal system's job to figure out exactly what's going on. It's my legal responsibility to report what I've heard. Marriage conflict. Anger is often the biggest roadblock to progress. After letting a husband and wife vent anger at one another, I try to get them to take a step back to see a long-term solution to their crisis. Only then can we begin working constructively. Loss of job. For the unemployed, a large part of the crisis is self-identity. A man especially assumes all the family's financial responsibility is his, and he's dropped the ball. Since society says a man is what a man does, he feels like a loser. He may even be hearing that from his wife or kids. I have 2 immediate objectives in these cases. First, I help the person feel worth outside of his or her ability to provide financially. Second, I find the immediate financial pressure point, a mortgage payment, a tax penalty, and help the person figure out how to deal with. Threatened suicide. Most people who threaten suicide feel they've lost control of everything except death. So the last thing I do is try to wrest control from them by saying, don't do it, it's wrong. Think of all the people you would hurt. That just reinforces their despair. I let them take control even the conversation, tell me what's going on in your life. I affirm the one positive action they've just taken, calling me. It was great of you to reach out to someone. It's important for you to do that. I let them feel they've taken some control of their lives already. Their calling was a good thing. Since the early days of my ministry, I have intentionally sought opportunities to help people in crisis. I've volunteered as chaplain of hospitals, with the police and fire departments. I've gone out of my way to build a network of relationships outside the church and organizations such as Rotary Club, so that people in the community with a crisis but without a pastor can call me, emphasize to the congregation that despite the size of our church, I'm available in a crisis. Why bring more problems upon myself? Crises are life-defining, path-setting moments for people. If someone stands at their side, representing Christ and offering compassionate help, they often will draw closer to God. And that finally is what my ministry is about. And that is a very powerful, as far as I'm concerned, article written by Gary Gilbertson. And so therefore, we're going to stop here. We've pretty much completed and covered a lot of Howard Stone's book in terms of crisis counseling. And on our next meeting, we're just going to take a look at the church. The church, and in terms of church as a caring community, and that chapter 6 would really be the concluding chapter of the Howard Stone's book.